84 years ago, 6 Japanese midget submarines slipped into Pearl Harbor. 5 of them never came back. But the doctrine they were testing did. On the 10th of May, an Iranian admiral stood in front of cameras and announced that 14 of those same kinds of submarines, small, claustrophobic, designed to lie on the seabed and wait, were now hidden somewhere in the Strait of Hormuz. He called them trigger-ready. Then he submerged them and let the world wonder. This is the story of what those submarines are actually doing down there, and the older question they cannot escape. What is happening in the Strait of Hormuz this week did not begin this week. It began on the 28th of February, when American and Israeli airstrikes opened a war that killed the Iranian supreme leader in its first hours. Within 5 days, Iran closed the strait. Within 10, the Iranian Navy was laying mines. By the 13th of April, the United States had a blockade running on every Iranian port that mattered, and 3 carrier strike groups had moved into position around the Persian Gulf. The Bush, the Lincoln, the Ford. 27 warships. Roughly 40% of every American naval vessel actively deployed anywhere in the world. All of it concentrated in one stretch of water about the size of New Jersey. Inside that stretch, Iran has been running its own counter-blockade, charging up to $2 million per ship for passage. And inside it now, beneath 36 meters of warm, salty, sediment-heavy water, sits somewhere between 14 and 20 Iranian Ghadir-class midget submarines, doing what midget submarines have done for the better part of a century. The question worth asking is whether anyone is really learning the lesson the last 80 years should have taught. Most people who follow this story know the surface picture: Iranian tankers running toward the coast, American F/A-18S launching from carrier decks. The Sea Star 3 hit in its smokestack on the 8th of May. The Sevda hit the same way, same day. The Hasna hit in its rudder 2 days before that. 61 commercial vessels turned around at the blockade line, 4 disabled. By any tactical scorecard, the United States is winning the surface war. What most people do not know is that the same week the tankers were being disabled, Lloyd's List was quietly reporting something else entirely. At least 26 ships had bypassed the American blockade in both directions by the 20th of April alone. Iran was granting passage rights to vessels flagged in China, Russia, India, Iraq, Pakistan, the Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand. Chinese oil was still moving. Russian shipping was still moving. The blockade is not a wall. It is a filter, and what gets through the filter is one of the most important questions in the entire conflict. But there is a deeper question underneath all of it. Why submarines now? Why announce them publicly? Why surface them in formation, in front of cameras, only to submerge them again? Because the Iranian announcement was not a military move. It was an insurance move. Here is what a Ghadir-class submarine actually is: 29 meters long, about 120 tons. 7 men inside a steel tube the volume of a modest delivery van, diesel-electric propulsion, 2 torpedo tubes, capable of carrying a Valfaj heavyweight torpedo, a JAS-2 cruise missile with a 300-kilometer reach, or 4 to 8 naval mines per sortie. Reverse-engineered from a North Korean design called the Yono, which itself descended from a half-century-old Yugoslav design, which itself drew lessons from Soviet midget submarines, which themselves were studying what the Japanese had pioneered in the Second World War. The Ghadir is not new technology. It is an iteration on a tactic that is older than the carriers it threatens. And the tactic is simple: lie still on the seabed. Shut down every system that does not keep the crew alive. Let the noise of commercial shipping above you mask the small sounds you cannot stop making. Weight. The Persian Gulf is engineered to favor that weight. Average depth 36 meters. Salinity 40 parts per thousand, higher than the Atlantic, with thermal layers that bend sonar away from anything resting on the bottom. Sediment from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, churned by tidal currents, scatters active sonar pulses into noise. Above the layer, hundreds of commercial vessels pass each day with engines that produce exactly the frequency range a small diesel-electric submarine would otherwise be detectable on. To an American sonar operator looking at this picture, a stationary Ghadir reads as bottom rock, sediment, or fish. To find it, you have to know it is there first, and even then you may not find it before it finds you. So the United States has done what it must. P-8 Poseidons fly continuous patrols out of Al-Tafra, dropping rings of sonar buoys in patterns optimized for shallow water. Each aircraft carries up to 129 of them. Passive boys listen for the cocktail party of underwater sound, looking for the one frequency that does not fit. Active boys ping into the dark, hoping for an echo that returns from something man-made. MH-60R Seahawks lower dipping sonars from above. Towed arrays trail behind American destroyers, listening backwards. Virginia-class nuclear attack submarines work the deeper channels, and unmanned surface vessels stitch the acoustic landscape together second by second. If a Ghadir surfaces, snorkels, or makes a single mechanical noise above the masking threshold, a Mark 54 lightweight torpedo can be in the water within minutes. But the Ghadir does not have to do anything to win. It only has to exist. This is the lesson the World War II midget submarines tried to teach and almost nobody recorded properly. At Pearl Harbor, the Japanese midget submarines failed catastrophically. All 5 were lost. Their crews were killed or captured. Their torpedoes did no measurable damage to the American fleet. By every conventional standard, the operation was a disaster. 6 months later, 3 of the same class entered Sydney Harbor. Again, all were lost. They sank one ferry that had been converted into a barracks ship. 19 Australian sailors died, but the city itself was untouched. Tactical failure, strategic disaster. Except neither failure was actually the point. The point was that for the next 4 years of the Pacific War, every time an Allied ship entered a forward harbour, somebody had to ask whether there were midget submarines waiting. Net systems were built, patrols were stood up, sonar watches were maintained around the clock, shipping was rerouted, insurance premiums rose. The Japanese spent very little to deploy those midget submarines. The Allies spent vastly more responding to their possibility. The submarines did not have to hit anything, they only had to be plausible. This is the calculation Iran is making, and it is the only calculation Iran has left. Iran's surface fleet has been destroyed. The frigate Dana lies on the seabed off Sri Lanka. Alvand, Sabalan, Sahand, Jamaran, Dalaman, all reportedly sunk. The Fateh-class submarine is gone. A Tarek is gone. Iran lost an estimated 11 Ghadirs in the opening phase of the conflict, leaving somewhere between 14 and 20 operational. That is not a force capable of fighting the United States Navy in open water. It is not a force capable of contesting the strait in any conventional sense. What it is a force capable of being plausible. Because the math underneath this is brutal. A single mine struck by a single tanker would lead Lloyd's of London and every other major maritime insurance market to suspend coverage for the entire region. Not for weeks, indefinitely. Without insurance, no commercial vessel transits. Without commercial transit, the strait closes itself. No Iranian action required. The Ghadirs do not have to fire a torpedo. They only have to make every shipowner in the world wonder whether today is the day. And while they wonder, something else is happening that almost no major news outlet has covered properly. On the 8th of May, a satellite called Sentinel-2 passed over Diego Garcia and recorded an image. In that image, anchored in the lagoon of one of the most remote American military bases on Earth, was a ship called the MV Ocean Trader. It looks like a commercial cargo vessel. It has no hull number. It transmits no automatic identification signal. It is 193 meters long, carries more than 200 special operations personnel, and has helicopter hangars, dive lockers, drone launch facilities, and a secure communications compartment hidden beneath its civilian skin. Until that satellite image, nobody outside the United States military establishment knew it was there. The image was published on the social media account of an open-source intelligence analyst within hours. By the time the Iranian command structure read its own morning briefings, the same analyst had cross-referenced the ship's previous movements, identified its arrival window, and explained to anyone who cared to look exactly what kind of operation a vessel of that profile is built to support. This is the war nobody is describing. Not the war of missiles and tankers, the war of who can see whom. For 30 years, special operations deployments were opaque to anyone without security clearance. Submarines could vanish for months. Motherships could be repositioned across oceans without anyone noticing. That window is closing. Commercial satellite revisit rates now make every major asset movement observable by anyone with an internet connection and the patience to look. The Iranians know where the Ocean Trader is. So does every analyst on social media. So does every other government with an interest in what comes next. The strategic value of surprise, the bedrock of special operations doctrine since the Second World War, is being eroded in near real time by teenagers with telescope software. which raises the only question that actually matters about the Strait of Hormuz in May of 2026. Both sides have made their forces visible. The Iranians announced their submarines on the 10th of May. They held a public ceremony. They surfaced their boats in formation. They wanted everyone to see. The Americans cannot hide their mothership at Diego Garcia. Their carriers run with their transponders on. Their tanker traffic in and out of UAE bases is logged in databases anyone can query. Their strike patterns are reconstructed from satellite imagery within days. They cannot surprise. In the 84 years since Pearl Harbor, every major naval doctrine has rested on some calculation of who can see whom, who can hide, and who pays the cost of uncertainty. Pearl Harbor was a surprise. Sydney Harbor was a surprise. Operation Praying Mantis in 1988, in these same waters, against this same adversary, was a surprise. 3 Iranian frigates and a destroyer sunk in a single afternoon. Largest American naval surface engagement since the Second World War. Iran absorbed the loss, the war ended, and the strait stayed closed for 1 more year. But neither side can be surprised now, and neither side can afford the cost of the other side simply being plausible. The Iranian submarines do not have to attack. The American counterstrike does not have to come. The diplomatic channel running through Pakistan, the second one this year, does not have to fail again. None of these things has to happen for the strait to remain what it has been since February. Closed to the people who built it open. Closed to the 800,000 barrels per day that used to move through it without incident. Closed to the global supply chains that priced their entire existence on the assumption that this particular stretch of water would always be safe. 5 Japanese midget submarines failed at Pearl Harbor. 3 failed at Sydney Harbor. The lesson was not that they failed. The lesson was that they did not need to succeed. Somewhere in the Strait of Hormuz tonight, 14 submarines are resting on the seabed. They do not need to do anything at all.